Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Most children say they want to run away from home, but few ever do it. My brother Joey was definitely in the latter category, using the excuse of freedom and independence to constantly break our parents' rules. He was a dreamer, an adventurer, someone that refused to be tied down by limits. But I never knew how deep his obsession became until last year. 3 of his friends, Brad, Robert, and Jeff, had started scouring deep web blogs to find the ultimate getaway spot, somewhere so remote and off the beaten path that it would allow them to do whatever they wanted, without anyone to judge them. I remember when I saw him chatting away on Discord, he would always say that he wasn't really going to just up and leave for some make-believe fantasy. But that changed after he started reading articles about Andrew Slater. Slater was a nature photographer from central Idaho with a story that seemed like the opposite of my brother's. A single dad with hardly enough time to keep 2 jobs, let alone see his kid or even have a social life. Sometime last spring, though, all that changed for him when his son had gone missing in a stretch of the Sawtooth National Forest. Joey and his friends talked about the case constantly, how Slater had spent 3 weeks with a posse to try and find his kid, only to emerge from the woods nearly 400 miles from where he started a full month later, entirely alone. According to Slater, something magical had happened during that period of time. His son, captured by an evil force called the Nearus, and Slater refused to speak to anyone about it unless they took him back there. Most chalked it up to him being some kind of serial killer, having used the woods as a burial ground for his unsuspecting victims, his son being the first one. But not Joey. He had always been a believer in the fantastical and the bizarre. So, one August day, he too decided to gather his friends and go out to the forest to complete the picture that Slater had painted for him in his mind so vividly. To go find this mythical beast. "What if you don't come back?" I remember asking him. "Sis, I'll be fine." I wasn't concerned about him finding Faye or even his mysterious Nearus. I was thinking he was finally using this as a reason to escape responsibility. "If it makes you feel any better, how about I livestream the whole thing? You'll be able to keep an eye on me night and day. Me and the guys," he told me. For some reason, I agreed to that ludicrous notion. Brad and Rob were amateur vloggers anyway, so if anyone could keep tabs on Joey, it was them. I was sure that my brother would find a reason to explain why his dreams weren't able to come true and call the whole thing off. But instead, what transpired over those next few summer nights was nothing short of a living nightmare. He uploaded his first stream on August 16th, our father's birthday, and made it an interview with Slater himself. As you may have guessed, the local authorities didn't buy his whole "the tree swallowed up my son" story, and he has been spending time in the county lockup, probably going to serve a life sentence at the state penitentiary, or worse. Anyway, Joey managed to convince the cops he was a reporter and got this statement from Slater. For the sake of this account, I've transcribed it. "You're going back there. You think it's that simple, do you? Find the Nearus. Why wouldn't it be? The Nearus only lets those in that it calls. I've read your transcripts with the police. I know the steps it takes to get inside. You don't know a thing. I went in there to rescue my kid. That's why it let me in. But you're a trespasser. A thrill seeker. You don't have a purpose other than your own selfishness. What's wrong with that? Because it will consume you. You and all your friends. The closer you get, the stronger the pull. Look, I didn't come here to listen to your voodoo crap. Now, the cops here have agreed to let you be my guide under a few conditions that I coaxed them into. Do you want to hear them or not? Waste your breath if you want, but I won't be going back there. 1. That you will agree to have a police detail with us at all times. 2. You'll guide us to where your son Ryan is buried. And 3. You will change your confession to guilty, so they can get you sent up to the Mac sack quicker. None of those will even be possible. Well, the first one, maybe. But the others... Why would I ever agree to that? I don't even know where Ryan is. What if I told you that I did? I would call you a liar. I searched that entire hellhole of a forest for a full month and never found him, not even a trace. I've looked into the local legends about the Nearus, gone to the dark web and found images, found articles on other missing kids. I believe you, Andrew. I believe there is something wicked about those woods. I think I know how to find it. So, then it has called you. You're next. What? I've changed my mind. Tell Deputy Jackson I'll agree to the terms, but I am stipulating one of my own. I want to bring my own camera along. I could probably spend days dissecting that interview, wondering whether Joey was lying just to get Slater to cooperate, realizing how crazy my brother was for asking a convicted criminal to guide him into a supposedly mystical forest to find an ancient evil. It sounded like something out of an adventure book. None of it made any sense. But Joey was never one to think rationally about these kinds of things. He acted on impulse. And the consequences were always the ones that hurt everyone but him. A few days later, his next stream made me stop dead in my daily routine. Andrew Slater was center stage, a hunting blade in his right hand, and a fresh kill in the other. It took a second for the camera to adjust, and I realized it was one of the canine units the police had brought. A dozen officers were pointing their weapons at the felon, demanding he drop his knife. But Slater was so nonchalant, it was as if the animal's death had been decided long before they ever made it to this stretch of trees. You wanted passage. Now the bond between our world and the Nearus is stronger. Be thankful the Nearus accepted such an offering. Last time, one of the team had to slit their throat to make it across. There was a bunch of murmuring and confusion from his audience. Joey directed the camera toward himself and provided an explanatory monologue. I have tried to capture the essence of Andrew's madness as best as possible. Signal is weak here. Honestly, I don't even know if he will get another chance to speak. I know this was supposed to be foolproof, but we are well past the point of no return, sis. I've seen too much to go back now. Slater, I don't know if he is psychotic or a visionary, but he claims this patch of trees is the gateway between our reality and something bigger than the universe itself. My brother paused and started to become emotional. I didn't want to say anything before, because I know you don't really believe in ghosts and shit. But ever since I saw those photographs and those drawings, the ones that Slater did bring back with him, there were these mangled corpses from the forest. I've been having these dreams. I don't know how to explain it. It's not the normal sort of dream. It's like what happens when you're just listening to an audio cassette or trying to learn a new language. There aren't any images, just voices. At least a dozen swarming voices that make my head feel like it's going to explode. Then I see that thing. The Nearus. It's stretching its wings like a mutated bat, beckoning me. Behind him, there was a commotion as it seems that Slater has somehow disappeared. He crossed the trees and then faded into darkness. Or so the image makes it seem. Crazy, right? That's how it's been since day one. Something about this whole thing. It's like Slater said before. The forest and the creature inside it all calling to me. Telling me to come. There's something here I'm meant to see. It's just beyond this stretch of trees. My brother sounds different somehow, as if he is under a trance. A few officers are shouting orders, following the path Slater took, all of them fading into the darkness, like it's a fog. Guess this is goodbye. Hopefully not forever. It took a whole 2 weeks for the other videos to come, and I frantically checked my phone and email every chance I could. The search and rescue operation was only supposed to take a few days. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. The way Joey seemed infected with the same madness. Maybe they all were. Was it possible this strange creature was drawing them nearer as its own namesake claimed? Soon, the videos only confirmed it. A nightmare, unlike any imaginable, happened to those poor men and women. And Joey got to see every glimpse of it. He's staring down at a body, noting the decay in the ashy skin, trying to determine the age of the corpse, perhaps. One of the troopers moved toward him, tilting his head slightly as he also examined the oddity. They've been dead for a while, he confirmed. A few of the other men came also to look, all of them as equally perplexed by this discovery. All right, quit your gawking and spread out. Slater couldn't have gotten far, Rob barked. He was one of the few who refused to get close to the decaying flesh. Where could he have gone? Another officer, one of the few women in the group, asked. I wondered the same thing. He was just in front of them in the last video, and this one seemed to be from the same grove of trees. Whatever sort of trick he played to get us here is probably how he escaped, Brad reasoned. I thought about the corpse, and how I felt certain that the facial structure resembled Slater. I wondered if Joey saw the same thing. Maybe we should check the footage. The officers watched as he started the feed, the image of all of them moving toward the forest playing again. Slater was standing there, moving toward the ash to spread the blood across the ground. Then, the forest shimmered, and Joey remarked, "Did any of you notice that?" The two men didn't answer, and kept watching as the strange reflections returned, and finally, Rob muttered off camera, "What kind of witchcraft is that?" It's this place. I have a feeling that this is the place Slater kept telling me about. The realm of the Nearus. The cop laughed. That's a dumb shit name. Where'd he come up with that? He muttered. It's weird, that's for sure. But what else did he tell you about it? Another wondered. Nothing, except that this creature controls people and consumes them. Makes them a part of it, Rob said. The path will be near once you see what your eyes say cannot be, he added. I remembered that being a famous line Andrew had repeated over and over, like it was a chant. The next video skipped forward a few hours near to sunset. "So, you really think maybe we aren't where we think we are?" a cop asked. A few of the other officers were returning from their search for Slater without any results. Someone mentioned that the markers they were using now were suddenly gone, replaced by scratch marks. "Are you sure? I could have sworn I saw a marker a few miles to the east," Joey argued. "GPS has been acting a little funny too," a forest ranger added. Brad checked his phone, unsurprised to see that the screen was totally black. "Can you lead us to the marker you saw?" someone asked. "Yeah, should be easy. It was a humongous old birch," Joey said, and gestured for all of them to follow him to the east. As the video shook, it felt like I was there, listening to the sights and sounds. As they traveled, I noted that the sun had almost dipped below the horizon, and darkness was covering the forest quickly. It gave off a strange orange glow as the last bit of twilight pierced the canopy. How could that be, when the timestamp for Joey's stream said it was mid-afternoon? Was something playing tricks on them? As they got further into the forest, it got darker until nothing was visible above, and I could only hear the sounds of boots crunching leaves. Finally, Joey turned on his flash on the body cam, and I could see immediately why the monstrous birch stood out to him. It was wider than anything that could have been in that region of the forest, and a grove of gray and purple flowers covered the forest floor, which made the eerie tree seem a little more frightening for a reason I couldn't quite discern. Joey also seemed to regard them cautiously. He led the video feed around to the opposite side of the tree to show the mark he was referencing. It was large, like a wild animal had used the bark of the birch to sharpen its claws. "We saw the same thing. We sure didn't put it there," Rob muttered. The markings looked like they were too precise for any creature, and they formed what looked like an upside-down capital letter A, with 3 lines straight down the middle of the lettering. "It looks fresh, maybe a few hours old at the most. Must be campers close by," Brad reasoned as he looked about the grove. "We'll set up camp here tonight," an officer instructed everyone. "I can take the dogs and make another sweep, see if we can pick up Slater's scent." They sat in silence for a moment as they waited, and Joey addressed the camera, his viewing audience of one. "Sis, all of this feels strange. It shouldn't be this dark. I haven't seen any animals or even insects. No running water. Everything is off. Slater led us somewhere, but I don't think it's a forest from our world. And I'm not even sure it was really him. I think it was this creature. It wants people to know it exists. Why, I can't be sure." As he finished talking, the officer with the canine units returned to the grove. "It's a bit disorienting out there, sir. The dogs are picking up several scents, but none that seem fresh," he explained. "It's like someone is dragging a carcass all around the woods." "Well, ain't that the shit?" the commander said, glaring at Joey. "Slater couldn't have gone far. It's dark, and this forest has a lot of animals that prowl at night. He'll seek shelter," Rob said. "He's killed 12 people out here. He's been a ghost before," Joey pointed out. "A ghost? Maybe that was what he had been all along," I wondered, recalling the corpse. Or maybe it was the creature, taking on his human form to entice others. "Come nearer, Nearus. Make us yours. Near to the dead, to be alive. Now we are gone. Part of the hive." That was Rob in the background, humming like a madman. What did it mean? The group settled down around the wide grove, taking out what little gear we had to sleep, and a few of the SWAT officers guarded the exterior in different shifts. Joey kept his light on to illuminate the strange stillness. Despite the calmness of the forest, it felt disturbing to watch, like there was a predator waiting to strike. The next few videos were clearly Joey and his friends talking to different people to get their opinions on the forest and on the Nearus. "Is this going to wind up online or something?" the woman asked. "I've been camera shy all my life. Can't really say I won any beauty pageants, so forgive me if I don't like to talk," she added. "Shit is strange, man. You know that song I was singing earlier? Ain't got a clue where I heard it before. Just came to me," Brad said. The atmosphere seemed peaceful for a moment, but it didn't last long. There was a soft chirping echo across the forest, almost like crickets. But as they all listened, it grew louder and louder, until it seemed to surround the entire grove. Even the cops nervously raised their rifles to see if something might come out of the darkness. Then silence covered everything again. "I don't like it here," Rob remarked. "I think that makes all of us," the commander said. My brother turned his video feed toward the flowers that covered the forest floor, trying to relax and focus on their vibrant colors. As Joey kept looking at them, I couldn't help but notice that the tiny petals seemed to flicker back and forth. Joey seemed to notice it as well and reached down to touch one of the flowers, picking it up and marveling at its simple but elegant beauty. As he kept staring at the petal, I noticed that it flickered again, and then it lifted from his finger and fluttered about his hand. It wasn't a flower at all, I thought, as I watched the small, strange-looking insect glide about. "It looks like a butterfly of some kind," the female officer observed as she looked about at the other flowers and noticed they were also starting to shimmer with movement. "Maybe we should move somewhere else," Joey observed. Several more of the winged insects spread their shiny wings and lifted into the open air to fly about. "There have to be hundreds of them here," the commander realized. Slowly, the chirping noise we had heard earlier returned to the forest. As Joey kept recording, I saw the butterflies speed up as the noise grew louder, as though agitated by it. "Ow!" Someone cried out in surprise as one of the insects flew across the upper wrist and cut them. "What the?" Joey muttered, and then one of the insects sliced across an officer's face like a razor. Several more of the butterflies began to swirl about the group, like miniature fighter jets, cutting at them as a perceived threat. "We need to move," Joey barked. The swarm was growing larger by the second as they all tried frantically to find cover. I felt my heart beat faster as they ran for cover. The noises grew louder as well, the strange insects furiously attacking all. Behind him, an officer fell to the ground as more of the butterflies swarmed around his body, each one slashing across his exposed skin as they angrily attacked. "Rob!" Brad shouted as a trooper behind him took out his firearm and began to fire at the endless array of insects. It seemed like they were all forming a singular mass. But amid the hollow shell of the countless butterflies, it was clear that firing on them was simply a waste of ammunition. Joey moved to the other side to try and help Rob. His screams grew louder as the swarm surrounded him. I held my breath and watched as the creatures consumed him like ravenous piranhas, cutting at him relentlessly. They all moved together as one, getting nearer and nearer until the swarm suffocated. "Leave him!" the commander called out as the other butterflies rose to join the storm of blood and fury. Rob writhed in pain, trying to cover his body and face as much as possible as the butterflies finished their feast. Then, the feed slipped to the next video. It was daytime. There were fewer members of the team now, and others with more blood and bruises from the bizarre forest. There was this strange, deep moaning in the background, too, as if the entire woods were chanting that bizarre melody. The group was moving deeper into the dark forest, more sounds surrounding them as the SWAT team turned on their night goggles and led them to the maze of trees. All Joey could do was hold on to his camera, use the same type of lens effect, and try his hardest to keep up. Something grabbed a hold of his foot and he tumbled downward, his camera slipping from my hands as my brother fell onto a mass of wet leaves. From this angle, I saw the canopy and held my breath. The tops of the trees were made of people's carcasses, their bodies twisted and pushed almost beyond recognition. Food for this supernatural garden. And there, amidst the feast, was the Nearus. Its ghastly wings spread impossibly wide, its glowing eyes mesmerizing my brother. It leapt toward him for the kill. The feed went black again. Somehow the group had returned to the grove, but the massive birch was now gone. Brad was the one filming now. Had something happened to my brother? I had no choice but to watch and find out. There, in the shiny gray mass of flowers, I could make out what remained of Rob's body, and the female officer took off her helmet to honor her fellow comrade. The constant song from the forest had the few remaining officers seeming agitated. Was it making them turn on each other? The next clip showed what I feared the most. Joey was a victim as well, and now his carcass seemed to be host for some new life. Brad zoomed into the open wounds. My brother's body was swollen near to his abdomen and thighs, as though the bites from the insects had caused some sort of allergic reaction. "Help me turn him over," the voice said, trying to sound professional. I saw only a handful of patrol officers left. I heard bones crack, and under the unsettling noise another strange sound, like something moving. Brad looked at the pallid face and eyes, and I was left wondering if the Nearus had taken control of his corpse. Then I watched in shock as small green worms began to wriggle their way out of his open mouth. "Claire," Brad said, pulling the officer away. She saw them as well, and Joey's face became more swollen as the worms split his skin open, sliding down across his pale cheek and making soft screeches in the morning air. Brad shut off the camera again. I found myself hyperventilating. Those creatures were the larvae of this beast, seeking out new hosts to come and be infected, devouring all life. It took all of my strength to click the final video, but I needed to know where this ended. Brad was examining a bag that had Slater's name tag. Then I realized it was the photographer's son's backpack. The Nearus was silently watching in the lens reflection as Brad flipped through the contents of the bag. The first item was a photograph of a group sitting around a campfire. All of them were wearing a logo connected to what looked like a scouting program. Slater was in the picture, and despite its age, he looked the same. Other faces looked familiar. Rob and Jeff were in there too. They said they didn't know anything about Andrew. Guess that was another lie. Or maybe the Nearus is creating this narrative now, making its own story. Brad told the camera as it focused on the image of the two together at the camp alongside Andrew. The picture looked unfinished. Next, there were some news articles that he held on the camera to give viewers a chance to read. A Southern college student that had applied for a film class disappeared over the weekend of September 13th, 1998, with no clues to suggest where she went. The studio in question, Fusoya Entertainment, was later found to be a shell corporation. They were creating a movie based on the Nearus. "I can't really explain where I got the idea for the legend," the director said in an interview. "It just sort of came to me the other day. I felt like I was a child again, experiencing my first boogeyman when I sketched it out. It felt like I was being guided somehow," he explained. The movie was never finished due to the college student disappearing, but no evidence ever linked them to the girl's disappearance. Several of the other articles Slater's son had related to missions involving the Navy or Homeland Security, an experimental bioweapon to use the Nearus against terrorists. It makes itself become what they fear. It creates itself and feeds off of itself. It's a self-perpetuating monster, the report said. Then there was one about a clinic that got shut down in Utah for questionable practice. A doctor that was on the run for illegally selling prescriptions. Stuff that made people have hallucinations. Brad was examining the picture of the scouts closely again. It's the same number of victims. Slater brought them here. These patients are the ones that first made a connection to this Nearus. As though hearing its name evoked its strength, I heard the ungodly beast scream in the background, and the picture started to fade, to become a part of the forest too. Nothing here is real, Brad realized as he touched the ground. His lens focused on the central part of the grove, where the trees had once stood, and tried to touch it. It looked like he was pressing against something invisible. The tree was still there, cloaked, like a weapon. There was a throng of voices around him as he too began to fade away. The path is set. Your guide awaits you. Mourn for those who come, for those who were before shall be found again. Who was he talking to? I saw that strange creature bound off into an empty landscape. And then, the video ended, and I found myself numb and confused. What had happened to my brother? The strange story these videos told haunted me. I showed the videos to the police, but they didn't believe my story. Said it was a hoax from a sicko that likely had killed good cops. I know I will need to go to this strange forest and see for myself. I suppose you could even say that I heard the Nearus calling me too. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm nearly at the grove now where Slater took them to a world behind, and I see the sun going over the western edge of the tree line behind me. I can hear the creature calling out for my blood. I take the first step in the direction my brother went, into a forest of magic and danger, a place that does not exist except to destroy. It felt as though it were right, the path I was meant to be on. But I can't say for certain why. I just know I have to get nearer.
I grew up in a tiny town in Vermont. Tiny in terms of population, not size. There were huge sprawling farms and wooded areas, but almost no people. More cows than people, which is standard for a lot of small towns in Vermont. So, clearly not the most fun in the world for a kid who was sick of freezing winters and awful balmy summers surrounded by boring Vermonters that didn't have many kids my age. My only close friend was Tina, who was a year older than me. We spent almost all our time with each other, constantly dreaming about life outside of Vermont. The people in our town were strange folk, different than in other places. One thing I didn't realize about small towns until I moved to the city is how incredibly superstitious people in towns like mine could be. They believed in the strange, the paranormal. They believed in Luvia. Luvia was an older French-Canadian woman who had moved to Vermont when she met her husband, and everyone in town thought she was a clairvoyant. Psychic. Even my own parents did. One day, my mother lost her wedding ring. She had looked around everywhere for it. They called Luvia, and she immediately told them it was under old rotting wood. They looked in the backyard where my father had been tearing apart a decaying piano he'd found. My mother had helped him one day. The ring was there, under old, rotting wood. After hearing a lot about Luvia from older townsfolk who seemed to think she was 100% credible, Tina and I decided to go see her one evening to try to find out whatever she could tell us about the future. I was skeptical, but it seemed like a fun thing to do as a joke. So we dropped by her house in the early evening, and she opened the door as we walked up the pathway to her house. Before we even had a chance to knock, Tina elbowed me hard in the ribs and whispered that Luvia was clearly a psychic. She sensed us coming to the door. I whispered back that it probably had more to do with her house being full of windows and the fact that she probably saw us coming from a long way away. Either way, I started to feel strange the minute we got close to her. She was very, very old, very tiny, and kind of sunken. Sunken eye sockets and sharp cheekbones and a sort of concave chest cavity. It was more than a little unnerving, but she smiled and was sweet to us, and I started to warm up to her. Nothing about her or her house screamed creepy psychic to me, just a well-dressed older woman in a cabin-style house. It looked like you'd imagine any typical grandmother's home. Doilies, knitting, family magazines, etc. We told her that we were interested in a clairvoyant reading, and handed her about $20 that we had scrounged together between the two of us. She led us to her kitchen table and asked which of us wanted to go first. "What can you tell me about my love life?" Tina asked. Luvia had no crystal ball, tarot cards, or tea leaves. She just closed her eyes and sat silently for about 2 minutes. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Michael Carten." Tina stared at her for a few seconds until Luvia repeated, "Michael Carten, the man you're going to marry. Michael Carten." Tina thanked her and repeated the name to herself a few times. Michael Carten, Michael Carten, Michael Carten. Luvia then turned to me. "Whatever you can tell me, I'd like to hear," I said. "It doesn't have to be about my love life or anything." Luvia closed her eyes for a few seconds, but information about me seemed to reach her much quicker than her visions of Tina's husband. She looked straight into my eyes, grabbed my hands, and said, "The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off its claws. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. The thing that will kill you, you won't see coming." The three of us sat there in silence for quite a while. I felt sick, shaken up. Luvia looked as if she wished she didn't have to tell me that. Is there anything I can do to stop it?" I asked. Luvia slid our money back across the table to us. "No charge for the reading." Tina and I slunk out of Luvia's house quietly. We didn't say a word on the way back to our houses. Tina just found out the name of the love of her life. I got to listen to a horrifying cryptic message about my death. I was 12 years old. I was fucking terrified. When Tina left me at my doorstep, she tried to make light of the readings. "How does she know who I'm going to marry?" she asked. "And it's not like some monster's going to get you. Some skin-shedding, bloody, sharp... It's not like some monster's going to get you. It's not like... Some monster isn't going to get you." For years, I looked for it. The thing that will kill me. I could almost feel it. Sensed it just behind each car, swaying behind the trees at night, underneath the fresh snow, waiting outside my window. With every step, I hesitated. Every time I tried to sleep, I could almost see it. What had she said about its teeth? I looked out for sloughed skin, for blood, for skins, for hides, but I never found it. When I was 18, I left for college in California, to get far away from the snow and the cold and the thing that will kill me. I stopped sensing it everywhere. My heart stopped pounding whenever I walked alone at night. Maybe whatever it was, it stayed in Vermont. Maybe it wasn't a thing at all. People in California laughed when I told them the story, and it stopped seeming real. Just the ramblings of a tiny, ancient French-Canadian woman. It wasn't real. When I was 27, a wedding invitation came in the mail. Tina was getting married. This was the first I had heard of it. I was still in California and barely kept in contact with anyone from back east. It seemed like a past life. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Michael Carton and Tina. Wait. No. Clearly she had the name in her mind. Michael Carton. And she sought him out. It had nothing to do with Luvia. Her predictions weren't real. They couldn't be. Clairvoyants don't exist. It's ridiculous to think that kind of thing happens in the real world. I went to the wedding. Tina, Michael, and I laughed about the whole thing. The psychic knew. She predicted it. Of course she didn't. Tina and Michael decided it was nothing more than a funny story to tell their future children. Just tell us if you run into some beast with razor-sharp teeth that's gathering skins, okay? Then we'll think it's more than just a funny coincidence. I left the wedding as sure as I ever was that the thing that will kill me wasn't real. Didn't exist. I looked behind the trees, behind the cars. Nothing was waiting for me. Nothing was ready to skin me. I didn't know why I had been scared so long. The best thing about Tina's wedding was that we got back in touch for the first time in a very long time. We were very different people than we had been as children, but we still shared more of a bond than we realized. She was happy, living in Vermont with Michael. She told me everything that was going on in our town. The population slowly increasing, the new schools they were building, the babies that were born, Luvia dying. As the years went on, her calls and emails got less and less frequent. She always seemed to be busy. Soon, they tapered off completely. I missed her, of course, but I had my own life, and I could check in on my childhood home whenever I wanted. One winter, I came into town to visit my parents for the holidays, and decided I'd swing by Tina's house. I'd normally never just drop by, but she was pretty bad about answering her phone, and I really wanted to see her. I pulled up to her and Michael's house. 2 cars were in the driveway, so I figured they were both home. I walked up and rang the doorbell. Michael opened it, dressed in several layers and a large coat, as if he had just come in from the snow. He invited me inside. He looked very surprised to see me and asked if I had talked to Tina recently. I haven't, actually. Not in several months. Sorry for the invasion. I don't usually just drop by like this, but I was wondering if I could see her. I figured you'd know. That you'd have heard. She left me a few months ago. Just up and left. Hasn't spoke to me since. Oh, God, I said. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He took off his coat and hung it on a coat rack by the door. Can I take your coat? He asked. I told him it was all right, that I wouldn't be staying long. I was just so shocked she'd do something like that. He was a really good guy. I'm sorry, I was about to get ready for bed. I've got an early work day tomorrow. Do you mind? He kicked off his shoes, pulled his sweater off, and headed toward his bathroom. I settled in, looked around their home. Of course, I don't mind. Do you know where she went? I don't, he yelled from the bathroom, mouth full of toothpaste. She didn't call until after she was gone. That's awful. I'm sorry. He started flossing, and when he saw me looking toward him, closed the door for privacy. When I heard the shower water start running, I pulled out my phone, figured I'd take this time to look through Tina's last messages to me, to see if she gave any hint to where she went, any clue. My phone fell out of my hand as I grabbed it out of my bag, and I saw it drop beneath the couch. As I felt around under the couch for my phone, my hand hit something else. A massive clump of long hair. I pulled it out from beneath the couch. It seemed so strange, such a large mass of hair. Brown hair. Tina's shade. Hair with a piece of scalp still attached. The thing that will kill you is gathering skins. I turned toward the bathroom door. Michael was still showering. The thing that will kill you is washing the blood off its claws, flossing, brushing. The thing that will kill you is sharpening its teeth, sloughing off his outer clothes, his shoes. The thing that will kill you is shedding its skin. Oh God, the thing that will kill me. I heard the water in the shower stop, movements from inside the bathroom. I ran out the door, slammed the door, sprinted to my car, shaking, watching the door. My hands fumbled with the keys, shaking. The door to the house opened. My car started. I drove. I didn't look back. I drove all through the night, through most of the next day, only stopping when I absolutely had to. I had no idea if he was following me. I had no idea what I had just seen. My heart didn't start beating normally again until I was 2 states away. I went home. This was months ago. I called the police. They investigated. Nothing turned up. They're sure she just left him, moved away. Maybe she did. Maybe she's far away, safe. Maybe nothing's coming for me. Maybe Michael's just a poor guy whose wife left him. Maybe it's nothing behind the trees, in the snowdrifts, underneath the cars, outside my door at night, and the windows. Maybe it's nothing. Probably it's nothing. Luvia's been wrong before, hasn't she? The thing that will kill you, you won't see coming.
A single day added on to my prison sentence meant the difference between a normal jail and the unending nightmare of Pembina prison. I was supposed to get 364 days. That was the deal. But the judge didn't like my attitude, whatever the hell that meant. So he made it 365. Boom. 1 year was the minimum for prison. My lawyer made a stink and a half, but it didn't do any good. It's not his fault. In fact, he's the one who's going to release this statement to the press, or leak it online if the Guardian Corrections Group, GCG, tries to get an injunction on us. People have to know what happened at Pembina Prison. I'm going to put it right out there, and I'll tell you that it was haunted. You think I'm joking, nuts, or lying, but you have no idea. Haunted prisons aren't anything like you imagine. Those places that advertise themselves and give people tours are sick jokes compared to the real thing. It got so bad that you can actually look up CGC's official filings for Chapter 11. That shit put them out of business on their very first prison. And right there on the briefs, using an early statute of North Dakota law from 1857 to file an insurance claim, it says, site of Pembina Prison confirmed by Governor's Office and 2 notary publics witnessing in person to be afflicted by the supernatural such that continued business is impossible. It wasn't the first time the prison was closed for that reason either, but leeches kept buying it and reopening it, hoping to make a buck off the common man. And I was shoved into that hellhole without knowing the history even a single bit. Don't get me wrong, the building itself wasn't so bad, especially for something straight out of 1853. It was a big stone cube that was squat, heavy, and cramped, but way less sealed off than modern prisons. We could see a lot of the cells around us. There was only one main hallway per floor, and we were close enough to pass things between the bars and have some real human interaction. It could have been worse. There were 5 floors and capacity for 500 prisoners. When I first got there, I had a bunch of cellmates, and I heard that there were 2,000 guys locked up, and I believed it. But that soon changed. I didn't talk to anyone for the first 3 weeks. I'd never been to real prison before, and I was messed up over it. I didn't want to accept that I would be in that place and stuck with 3 other guys in my cell for an entire year. The whole prison seemed full of fear, man. The bottom floor would start screaming and hollering and panicking in the middle of the night all at once. We were on the top floor, but we could hear the screams echoing through that open old layout like they were right there with us. I just thought the prisoners on the bottom floor were all nuts until the guards weren't there to wake us up the first day of my 4th week. When I woke up in my corner without some asshole guard banging on the bars of the cell, I finally had to talk. I asked one of my cellmates, Dante, what was going on, and I'll never forget the fear in his voice as he said something that should have made us all incredibly happy. The guards are all gone, man. The prisoners were talking quietly between the cells and loudly between the floors through various whispers and shouts. But the most we could figure out was that something on the first floor had made them all quit and protest. Sure, must have been the crazies screaming like that during the night, right? Except none of us could get any word from the bottom floor. It was dead silent down there. The guys in the second called out for hours. Someone was down there, they said, because they could hear shuffling footsteps walking around at random every so often, but whoever it was never said a single word. That was the first time Dante mentioned the crazy stories from the first floor. He muttered that he hoped none of that was true, but when I asked about it, he just shook his head. Nothing, man. None of it ever made sense. We were a little worried as the day wore on, and no one came to let us out for breakfast, and no one came to let us out for lunch. The time we usually got to spend outside in the yard came and went, and people began getting restless. In the cell to our left, Dante's friend, Will, began telling guys to pass the word that we should all calm down and start sharing any food we had holed away. I remember asking Dante, is it really that bad? Well, they've denied meals and yard time for a day or two before, he told me. But the other 2 guys in our cells didn't look convinced. One of them said, but not like this. They made damn sure we knew what we did. They never just up and left. Someone handed us pieces of crusty old bread through the bars. It was much appreciated. The new guards didn't show up for work for another full day. We got plenty of yard time that day from these new guys, but they seemed more confused than us. We all watched from a distance as Will asked a guard about what had happened. The guard shrugged. I don't know. GCG was paying a premium for fast hires, so I signed up. What about the prisoners on the first floor? Will asked. We could still hear them shuffling around down there. We looked on the way out to the yard, but we couldn't see anybody. Huh? The guard frowned. Nobody in there. They all got transferred. Transferred? The hell's that mean? It means DOCR took them back. Returned to state custody since the company couldn't handle them. Well, that made sense. If the floor had been full of nut jobs, then North Dakota's first local private prison company hardly had the experience to handle them. But these new guys didn't even have the skills to handle us. There were half as many guards as before, and they didn't know the routines or who the dangerous ones were among us. As a result, they were distant, scared, and forceful. All except one guy, Kellen. Kellen wasn't the first guard to treat us like human beings, but by then he was the only one around. He traded jokes while in the yard, never hit us, and looked us in the eyes when he talked. He went and found some paperwork to confirm the crazies had actually been transferred. But it took 3 months to get that info out of GCG. By the time he told us he'd heard back, we'd sort of forgotten the whole thing. 2 nights later, maybe 2 hours past lights out, the guys on the second floor began screaming. Dante leapt up and fell on one of our cellmates by accident before shouting, Shit, must be a fire. And the guys in our row began banging on the bars and shouting for the guards, but the uniforms charged past and headed downstairs without talking to us. We could hear them shouting orders down below and then yelling in confusion. The prisoners' screams were clear, coming from the second, and it sounded like they were terrified of something in particular and wanted help. The sounds of gates being slammed and people running reached us after about 10 minutes shouting, and then it was silent, and we sat in the dark waiting and listening until morning. When the new shift came in, they were surprised and confused, and Kellen came by to ask us what had happened. We told him what we knew, but he'd shown up and found open gates and an empty second floor. There was no indication what had happened, but he promised to check with corporate and figure out if the absent prisoners had all been rapidly transferred again. Dante gripped the bars and made sure Kellen was looking at him. Please find out who the hell is walking around there at night. Kellen blinked at that. I'm day shift, so I don't know what I can do, but what do you mean? The prisoners are gone, Dante told him, fiercely but quietly. But the guys on the third floor said they still hear someone, maybe 2 or 3 someones, shuffling their feet every hour or so till morning. I guess I could go look right now. Dante reached for the bars and grabbed his uniform, something which usually got us a beating. Hear me. Do not go in there by yourself. Stay in the stairwell unless someone's with you. Kellen nodded fearfully. It looked like he finally understood how spooked we were. He waved another guard off, and Dante let go. But nothing more came of it for a whole season. The night shift had quit, and more guards got hired at an even higher pay. Kellen and another uniform scooped out the first 2 floors, but they found nothing. Dante thought it was because they were looking during the day, but he wasn't about to ask our only friend to risk himself. It was maybe 3 months later. Yeah, I was halfway through my sentence, and I had taken up drawing, so I had a pen and paper, when we woke up in the middle of the night to everyone on the 3rd floor screaming in absolute panic. This time we were less scared during the event itself. Will offered a guard racing past $500 from his commissary account if the man would come back and tell them what was going on. Dante listened intently, trying to hear individual screams from the 3rd floor over everyone else's shouting and confusion. I wrote down any words he thought he heard. What I wrote down: Jesus Christ! Killing him! God! Let us out! Coming this way! We weren't as scared when it was happening because we'd lived through it twice before. But this time, the long-term fear was much deeper. Now we knew for sure what was going to happen again, and any prisoners that had the means began lawyering up and doing everything they could to transfer to other prisons, even if it meant worse conditions. The problem was the North Dakota prison system was already overflowing, which was the whole reason GCG got started in the first place. So every guy that got out meant it was that much harder for the rest of us. Both of our cellmates transferred, giving us motor space, so that was nice, but it was small consolation. Apparently word had started to spread outside, and GCG's solution, instead of paying the guards even more, was to stop having the night shift at all, except for just one poor guy. Kellen was a bit miffed he hadn't gotten a raise out of the whole thing, but he was starting to believe us that something was going on. By then, he'd been around a while, and he knew we weren't bullshitters. And too many other prisoners had told him they'd heard someone walking around the first, second, and third floors at random during the night. It was just a few steps, sometimes as many as 20, but it only happened every so often, and only once it had been long enough that you'd thought it had stopped for good. One guy on the 4th floor said he heard a full run from one end of the 3rd floor hallway to the other, clear enough that he'd expected the guard to come charging up the stairwell, but nobody had appeared. He slit his wrists and got transferred out on a medical leave the next day, so we took him serious. All that was enough to get Kellen to start doing some research on the outside. He came to us in the 7th month of my sentence with a pale face. Beside us at the bars, Will asked, "What's the word?" Kellen seemed grim. "A lot of bullshit out there, but this place is mentioned a lot. It's been closed before, but I keep getting stonewalled when I ask for the historical documents. Thing is, I don't think the prison itself is the problem. Get this." He pulled out a notepad for reference. 2 Canadian priests, Fathers Norbert Provencher and Sévère Dumoulin, visited Pembina in 1818, before it was even an official township. That was when the Hudson Bay Company was big around these parts. That's how long ago it was. Pembina was the biggest town in North Dakota then, so the trading post was full, and the priests chose to sleep outside by where the Pembina River meets the Red River. The folk tale has it that a vision of a rotting woman came in the night and stole Provencher's life. The 2 men bartered with her to split the remaining life between them, consigning both to live only 35 more years instead of 70 Sévère had left. Sévère got an extra month and 20 days as a gift from his friend for a sacrifice. It paused, as if we might guess the obvious outcome. They both died 35 years later. I knew Pembina Prison had a horrible problem, but that didn't mean I had to believe everything. Let me guess. A month and 20 days apart? Kellen nodded. Dante snorted. "It's true, dude," Kellen insisted. "The dates of death are right there on Wikipedia, but get this. 35 years after 1818 made their death year 1853, the year this prison was built. And the place they camped that night? By the meeting of the rivers?" I didn't know what it meant, but I was beginning to feel very uneasy. "It's right here, isn't it?" He was dead serious. "I think there's some shit here, ancient shit. I asked a guy I know, he's got Chippewa relatives, over at Turtle Mountain. They know the history of the Red River better than anyone else. He said his uncle told him to never sleep at the meeting of the Red River and the Pembina River. He said something lives there under the ground and awakens with the changing of the seasons." We were silent for a beat after that. It was folktale nonsense, but it was as good a theory as any. Whatever it was going to come back, and it wasn't friendly. Will talked to Kellen for another few minutes, but Dante was silent. After he was gone, I asked him, "What's wrong?" He sat on one of the now unused bunks and told me, "I got another 5 years in here, and I ain't got no money for a lawyer. Your sentence will be up before it reaches us, and I'll be here alone." "Will it?" There was no way to be sure. "I'll be back in 2 months for the 4th floor, and then 3 months after that for us. I could get out a week before or a day too late. It doesn't seem to be exact." He just looked at the floor. What I mean is, I do hope you get out before it comes. Oh. I wasn't sure what else to say after that, so I just sat in my corner, like I always did. It wasn't too much after that we heard GCG was going under. The mad rush of transfers had pissed off the state and lost the company a vital contract for a second location, and investors had pulled out or something. The number of guards was cut, then slashed, and Kellen took a pay hit to stay on as the only guy on the day shift. There's only 2 prisoners left on the 4th floor, he told the 20 of us remaining, as the general week we expected it to happen approached. I feel like I should stay late just to see what the hell's going on down there. But the former guards I asked about it are all terrified as hell and refused to talk. Some got violent just because I asked. It's cool, Will told him. You got a kid at home. Don't be here for it. The 20 of us left on the 5th floor, sat in our cells once night fell, praying and listening. On Monday night, nothing happened. The 2 guys down below occasionally shouted up to us that everything was clear. On Tuesday night, nothing happened. The strain was growing, though, and we could hear him breathing rapidly down there. I could only imagine the adrenaline rushing through them every minute until dawn. On Wednesday night, nothing happened. Yet something had changed in the air. The prison was much quieter now than 2,000 men had become 22, and I thought I could feel a subtle sort of heartbeat in the air, pounding against reality like it was a thin sheet of paper. It's just your imagination, Dante whispered. None of us were willing to speak louder than that. On Thursday night, the heartbeat became a feeling of footsteps approaching from a great distance. Guys! Will shouted from his cell. You good down there? Still here, one responded from down below. But I can feel it. It's at the door. It's knocking. What the hell's that supposed to mean? But the man below did not respond. Friday night. That was the night it would happen. All day the 2 guys on 4th pulled and clanged on their bars, begging to be let out. Kellen was torn. After 2 hours of listening to that pleading, he came up with an idea and transferred both of them up to our floor. If nobody's on 4, he said happily, then we'll all be safe, right? Out loud we agreed, but we were kidding ourselves. When the night guard showed up, he freaked and took the 2 men back down. He said out loud what we were all thinking. If nobody's on 4, then it'll just come right to 5 and get us all. What the hell was Kellen thinking? We had to listen to hours of sobbing that evening. It was the hardest trial of my life. I wanted to call out to the night guard. I wanted to ask him to get those men out of there. But if I did, I knew whatever was coming would find all of us instead. The moment it happened was like a cold hand on my shoulder. What's going on down there? Dante shouted. The man, who was not sobbing, called back, It's changing. Will demanded, What's happening? Tell us. It's red. Red? It's red. What's red? Will yelled insistently. God damn it, what's red? We stared down the hallway at the night guard, who stood listening with fear. The screaming began a few seconds later, this time only 1 floor below. We could clearly hear every word. The sobbing prisoner shrieked, There! It's there! The man who'd been communicating with us began incoherently, raging with fear against his bars. Then, strangely, he stopped. The 20 of us clung to our bars, unable to help, unable to flee. Many of us cried, but we were otherwise silent, for to yell would be to drown out the last words of the men below. But they were eerily quiet for nearly 2 hours. We waited in strained silence as random footsteps traversed the 4th floor every so often. What was happening? For the first time, the victims of whatever was going on down below had chosen to be quiet instead of yelling for help. Why would that make things different? At long last, the sobbing man broke the silence. "Oh my God, it's coming your way." "Shut up. It'll see you. Distracted. Hit your bars." The sound of clanging echoed up the stairwell. The sobbing man said with terror, "It knows. It knows. Jesus Christ, do something." We were no longer silent. We echoed that sentiment loudly and repeatedly to the guard. "Do something." He just stood there, literally quaking in his boots. Will screamed at him, "Snap out of it!" The other guards and prisoners got away. You can too. Whatever it is, it won't follow you if you let them out and leave. I shouted, "They're gonna die down there!" Dante threw his shoe, and the impact finally snapped the man out of his terror. The guard ran to the stairwell and descended. The first thing we heard him say was taken aback, "Mary, Mother of Christ." The sobbing man again, "Over here! For God's sakes, let us out!" The other prisoner wasn't talking for some reason. We could hear his terror, gasping, but that too went quiet. Then we heard a buzzer, and all the gates on 4 slammed loudly open. The sounds of panting, running, and someone dragging something followed. The prison went silent. And just like that, we were alone again. The formerly crowded prison now felt terrifyingly large and empty, with only 20 of us and no guards. That night, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from down below. I counted time as best I could. 40 minutes. Then someone took 3 steps out of his cell and into the hallway. An hour and 6 minutes. Someone ran 10 steps along the hallway and stopped abruptly. 28 minutes. The footsteps approached the stairwell, but then turned into a cell and went silent. The thing was, whoever it was sounded barefoot, and the starting and stopping locations did not match. Where they ended was often nowhere near where they began again later. By the time dawn came, we were scared into motionless, terrified silence, and it took Helen's arrival for us to begin stirring again. With GCG in bankruptcy court, we no longer had a night guard at all. If it came for us, there'd be nobody to let us out of our cells, like everyone else. We hardly talked, we hardly ate. Each passing day was a grain of sand falling through an hourglass, marking our executions. Our fellows began confessing to crimes they hadn't even committed just to get transferred to Supermax out of state, the only option left. Well, that and suicide attempts. One by one, Kellen escorted or dragged out guys out of our floor. 20 became 15, then 10. Then it was just me and Dante, with Will still in the cell to our left. The 3 of us and Kellen, 4 men waiting for doom. We sat playing card games in the weeks leading up to it. It would be 1 full year for me in that place, but I could swear I'd spent a lifetime in that cell. I couldn't think, couldn't remember life before, couldn't imagine surviving after. Every day I prayed for a transfer to come in, but North Dakota got sick of our shit, and the judges had stopped hearing cases from Pembina Prison. They didn't know there were only 3 of us left. Nobody knew. We contacted the media, we phoned the governor's office. We made a ruckus. That was worse than nobody knowing. It turned out nobody cared. 2, there was nobody higher up at GCG following the situation, and Kellen couldn't get anybody on the phone. Payroll, meaning just his paycheck, was being handled by a third-party disbursement company that couldn't answer questions about ongoing proceedings. The week approached. On Monday night, nothing happened. We were like statues in our cells, alone, waiting for a sign of the executioner's approach. When dawn came, we sighed and began moving again. Dante asked, You get out Friday?" I nodded. If things went like before, I'd be released the day of. As long as I left before sundown, I'd be all right. On Tuesday night, nothing happened. 2 for 2. Just one more day. I sat through that darkness until... No. The feeling of the prison had changed around us. A subtle heartbeat seemed to pulse against our faces and ears and eyes. It had come a day earlier in the week than the last time. That morning, Will patted my arm as we both leaned out the bars. "Sorry, man." Dante just shook his head angrily. I wasn't going to get out in time. On Wednesday night, the heartbeat became the sound of footsteps approaching from some unfathomable distance. I think I stood at the bars of our cell that entire day, fingers wrapped around the metal with force to match the tension in the air and in our minds. This couldn't happen. This wouldn't happen. My lawyer would walk in and tell me he'd gotten the judge's unfair edition of an extra day removed. One day. One goddamn day. Even if I'd spent the whole year in this prison, one day still meant life or death. Let me out! Let me the hell out, for God's sake! But nobody cared, and nobody'd listen. I'd like to tell you that Kellen stayed late that night. I'd like to tell you that when the entire floor began to glow red, the hallway, the cells, the stone itself, as whatever ungodly abomination in the earth began to wake up upon the changing of the season, as distant footsteps became a traveler at the door of our minds, I'd like to tell you that Kellen was there and hit the button and opened the gates and let us all out. I'd like to tell you that I didn't see anything, and that I'm not permanently a broken man. I didn't claw at the walls of my cell as it approached slowly, moving a few steps every 20 to 70 minutes. I'd like to tell you that all three of us were able to run away and escape that horror upon reality, with its rotting hands and blind eyes radiating crimson light as it searched for us at random. But I can't give you a satisfying end to this story. The disbursement company fired Kellen and changed the locks in the property. According to their paperwork, all the prisoners had been moved, and they thought he'd been getting paid for guarding an empty prison. They left us in there for 11 days before the error was found, which meant 11 nights with that thing. For 11 days we starved. For 11 nights we sat absolutely still, not daring to move or breathe or even look left or right. It knew where we were, generally. It stood right outside our cell for hours, and sometimes walked right through the bars and grasped at the beds around us, daring us to make even the slightest motion. When you've spent 6 hours staring into the blind crimson eyes of a rotting demon, unable to blink your eyes for fear it will hear the air your lashes move, when you've seen what it's seen, the worlds it's walked, reflected in hellish red, you'll understand. No one cares. I'd like to tell you that Kellen actually existed. I'd like to tell you we had a friend among the guards, and that it wasn't all that bad. I'd like to tell you I wasn't traumatized by the hell I went through being left to rot and left to die as nothing more than a number on some corporation's books. But no one cares.
When a heart fell out of the medicine cabinet, Carrie Pickett screamed. Not 2 seconds ago, she'd wandered in, relieved herself, and opened the swing door for her sleeping pills. Out it rolled, rebounding off the sink and against the floor with a sickening plop. The sudden movement startled her, and the realization of what it was caused her to reel back in ghastly shock. A human heart. A human heart on her floor. One of her hands clasped over her mouth, and the other searched blindly for the doorknob behind her. Twisting it open, she lunged out of the room as though the heart were about to give chase. A moment or two later, she gingerly peeked back into the bathroom. The heart was still on the floor, its wet creases reflecting tiny pins of light, its red shape flexed, and a second after, loosened. Once, twice, several times. A low, muffled sound similar to a dove's coo slipped out of Carrie's throat. It was still beating, pumping nothing but air out of its dark chambers. Mechanically, she rushed to the kitchen and clutched a handful of napkins. For whatever reason, she felt better holding them. When she returned, the heart was gone. Arteries and all, it left no blemish on the floor or cloudy splatter on the sink where it had ricocheted off. Fight and relief flushed through her system. She shuddered, thankful that the thing was gone, but horridly perplexed as to what had just transpired. Did she imagine it? Or had it actually happened? For the next few hours, ranging minute to minute, she'd poke her head through the door, checking if the heart had returned. When enough bravery accumulated, she opened the cabinet and sifted through it. No weird marks, no heart-sized trapdoors, nothing deranged at all. Just your imagination, the soft voice of coping whispered. You need more sleep. No more scary movies for you at night. The sleeping pills. Check the expiration date on your sleeping pills. Reassuring as these thoughts were, she could not get the image of a heart on her floor out of her mind. So vivid and wet and horrifically corporeal. A visual fallacy was one thing, but she'd heard it smack wetly against the floor, watched it beat with some ungodly pulse. No, she said out loud from the hallway, no different from her 10-year-old self toward anything she disagreed with. No, no, no. Hearts do not fall out of cabinets. Sane people do not see these things. Just the thought, the idea of such a horrible thing happening in her home offended her entirely. But despite the flux and flow of panicked thoughts, she was still able to sleep, thanks to the pill she took. Having convinced herself the heart was some strange hallucination, she got up bright and early and tidied up the house. That was the only therapy she needed in times of stress. A clean, quaint home. Not only that, book club was tonight. Carrie loved the meetings and found them to be the only thing she looked forward to throughout the week. It reminded her of how far she'd come in her lovely life, in a lovely neighborhood, with lovely friends. I belong here, she told herself often. I deserve this. Skipping the bathroom entirely, she decided to clean the sewing room where her mother's ashes sat on the oak sewing table. The urn was navy blue with a white flower grafted into its design. Next to it, a picture of Marianne Pickett smiled, hair a perfect Farrell flip. She was once an avid dressmaker before the Alzheimer's set in. The words sat in a row of ugly letters within Carrie's thoughts and still made her shudder. Draped lazily over a chair was her mother's favorite cottony white shawl. It had rarely not been hanging over her mother's thin shoulders. She'd found it in a rummage sale and instantly fell in love. They were practically giving it away, her mom had declared. Carrie used to despise the shawl and groan when it accompanied them on every one of their outings. The unsettling pattern was stitched so it resembled hollow-eyed faces with grimacing open mouths, silently wailing. It was neither cute nor lovely. The Alzheimer's had struck so fast it was frightening. The first Carrie noticed was the rapid shift in her mother's personality. Memory was the first to go, followed by a sheer cliff of paranoia. She was convinced that someone was sneaking into her house and stealing things or moving them to different rooms. Then she believed someone or something was in her closet, scratching at the door. "It's coming back!" she'd shriek. "Back again! I don't want it! I don't want it anymore!" No matter where they moved her, the episodes only grew worse until a heart attack took her in the night. Carrie swallowed bitterly at the thought of that very same condition someday entering her own world. Her mind being stretched so thin, it would inevitably start to tear. No, thoughts like that were ugly and didn't belong inside of her. However, witnessing a heart fall out of her medicine cabinet did make her anxious. As the sun set smoothly behind the hills, Carrie waited for the set of knocks at her door. First would come Joyce, cradling her toy poodle. Then Marie, with her strong perfume and gold bracelets. And then Elizabeth, with bottles of wine. The bi-weekly book clubs started at 8 and often went until late as the ladies laughed, sipped their wine, and discussed the latest novel. As wonderful as it was to read, the real enjoyment came from pairing the perfect wine with the perfect book. Light and zesty wines for dramas, dark, juicy red wines for allure. Book club was certainly not just about the books. But tonight was all wrong, dreadfully wrong. When Elizabeth's knock came, there were 2 voices on the other side of the door, and when Carrie Pickett opened it, she found that a blight had returned to her life, awakening like a dormant cancer. "I hope you don't mind an extra," Elizabeth beamed, "but she said you both knew each other." Blair Wilcox, the witch, the usurper, the spreader of rumors and bullshit. Yes, they knew each other. 4 years, from grade school to college, Blair had made it her life's work to make Carrie miserable. "Careful, she's got crabs," she'd whisper to the boys Carrie liked. "Whores don't go to heaven," notes read that hung in her locker, always in the same handwriting. And any girl Carrie attempted to befriend would soon be converted otherwise, after Blair was through with them. Now Blair had moved back. She and Elizabeth were old classmates who finally reconnected. Elizabeth told her about this fantastic book club with her closest friends. Yes, of course she could join. Still, throughout the evening, Carrie laughed, sampled her glass, and played social fiddle. If there was one thing she'd become good at over the years, it was how to play pretend. At the end of the evening, as Carrie took the glasses back to the kitchen, Blair stepped up. "Let me help." She smiled, already grabbing her own and following Carrie to the kitchen. The moment they were both alone, Blair let out an uncomfortable sigh. "Hey, I know how heinous I was to you back then, and frankly, there's nothing I can do to take any of it back." She paused and looked away remorsefully. "I want to apologize. You didn't deserve any of it, and I wouldn't blame you if you hated me for the rest of your life." "No problem," Carrie said with a stitched-up smile. "It's all water under the bridge. Honest." Blair's face blossomed into a smile, and as everyone said their goodbyes, she pulled Carrie into a hug and whispered, "I like your friends." Finally alone, Carrie stood swirling her wine glass. Yes, all water under the bridge, where your hair disappears beneath the waves and the piranhas gnaw at your lips. What was the last thing she threw in, like some nefarious warning? "I like your friends." Carrie thought about it more, and, irritated, she washed the thought down with a gulp of wine. That night, the quiet acoustics of the hallway were disturbed by her pacing feet. She took a deep breath and stared reluctantly at the bathroom door, thinking herself ridiculous for even feeding such a fear. But there was fear, nonetheless. "Stop it. There's nothing to be afraid of," she snapped at herself, reaching for the door. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the same old regular bathroom, pristine and white. When she looked toward the cabinet, the awful memory filled her brain. I repeat, her thoughts nipped. Stop imagining things. Sticking to it, she moved to the sink and opened the cabinet. The hand holding the swing door reeled back. Her jaw dropped open and hung there while her eyes glazed over, void of all things sane. A heart, still pulsing, was hanging in a flask-shaped sack anchored to the back of the cabinet. Red, webby veins spread like tendrils over the shelves, stretching and twining over Carrie's toothpaste, her razor, her mouthwash, her medicines. Their branch-like tips were still growing and inched their way down toward the sink like vines on an ancient temple. Carrie wanted to scream, and perhaps in some part of her she did. But instead, she ran to her room, grabbed her cell phone, and leapt back to the bathroom. By the time she set the camera and clicked on the button, the cabinet was empty once again. No heart to be found or photographed. She thought to call the police, but wondered how the conversation would go. "Yes, operator. A beating human heart was in my bathroom." "Sure, I'll hold." Then next, the neighbors would see the police cars in front of her house. Then the gossip would start, with Blair leading the charge, she thought. "What did I do to deserve this?" she asked gloomily as she slid to the floor and rubbed her temples. "Why am I being tormented? What does it want? Whose heart is it?" Everything was off-center and her reality was growing more slanted by the minute. Soon enough, it would reach a tipping point, and there it would be, a descent into madness. As she took a few breaths to calm herself, a petulant voice crept from inside the cabinet. Shawl. As if by itself, Carrie's body left the floor and ended up in the garage where she grabbed a box of nails and a hammer. Slamming the cabinet closed, she nailed each and every side shut. "No," she punctuated every smack of the hammer. "No, no, no, no." Once finished, she stepped back to marvel at her work, realizing only afterward that she probably should have taken her things out first. Shawl, she thought. That was the word she heard a few moments ago. It was clear as day. Carrie marched into the sewing room and grabbed the thing. This ugly thing she'd allowed into her home had no doubt played a part. It did not belong. But just as she went to toss it, a realization struck her. The texture of the shawl was nice. Strange, she thought, that a shawl so ugly could feel so pleasant, comforting even. Perhaps that's what her mother had seen in it. Sighing, Carrie tossed the shawl into a trunk in the bedroom. Out of sight, out of mind. For the next 10 days, Carrie was blessed with silence. Every so often, she'd lean an ear against the cabinet, listening for any muffled thump or wet crawling sounds. When she heard nothing, she'd smile and muttered softly, "I won." Her life had returned to its usual charm. When book club rolled back around, she figured Blair would be joining them again. Why wouldn't she? Her friends were making themselves at home, pouring wine, when Carrie stepped out to get the novel where she had left it laying. Hearing their whispers, she first thought they had started without her. But that wasn't it. They were leaning in close, whispering, and who was leading the quiet chatter but Blair, and her voice spreading like poisonous vapor, whispering things to her friends on her couch in her home. As Carrie entered, the mutters dissipated. "What were you all talking about?" she asked as she took a seat. Just some book ideas, Marie giggled before turning back to the novel, leaving Carrie in a wake of doubt. It had gotten especially late by the time her friends left, and this time Carrie was thankful to see them go. Just as she poured out the last glass of wine, there was a knock at the door. It was Blair Wilcox again. Forget something? Carrie asked, completing the question in her mind. Something else you'd like to sink your fingers into? No, Blair said, waving a dismissive hand. I was just wondering if you'd maybe like to grab coffee sometime and catch up one-on-one. Carrie fought the look of revulsion in her eye. That sounds great, but I have such a busy week ahead, it's hard to tell when I'll have a free moment. Blair frowned. Well, how about sometime next week? Trying to think of an excuse, Carrie heard a muffled thump somewhere in the house. She turned her head to listen for it again, then whipped back to her guest. Next week? No, that isn't looking good either. Anyway, I should head to bed now. Another muffled sound, this time much louder. A look of concern crossed Blair's face. Is everything all right? Peachy keen. Goodbye. Carrie all but slammed the door in Blair's face and made her way toward the hall, where another heavy thump resonated. An anxious bubble welled up in her chest. Go outside, the voice begged. Go outside and bring her upstairs with you. Prove that you aren't crazy. But what if there's nothing there? Carrie wondered out loud. That's just what she needed to give this bitch even more leverage to work with. Carrie's really lost her mind. She made me check for monsters in her bathroom. Instead, she reached into her pocket for her phone and made her way to the bathroom. She hit record as she slowly opened the door. The cabinet hung there menacingly, and just as her sock brushed the tile, a loud thump battered the inside of it. She drew back sharply, not daring to take another step. 2 of the nails she'd secured looked like they were rattling out of place. Leave me alone, Carrie yelled, and for a good 2 minutes, she thought it had worked. Then suddenly the entire cabinet sagged as the fasteners pulled away from the wall stud. Its integrity was yielding as the woodwork stressed and splintered. The door ripped open and broke right off its hinges. Wood scattered in fractured chunks. Nails clattered to the tiles. The shelves and all their contents barreled out in an avalanche. But Carrie noticed none of that. She was staring at the large shape that was unfurling from the cabinet. A woman flopping onto the bathroom floor, or rather, the upper half of a woman. Her skin was a muted septic color so thin that the grooves of her spine protruded. Black mottled hair hung wet over her shoulders and her milky eyes. The bottom half of her jaw was gone, leaving a blue shriveled tongue to swing and wriggle, and although her mouth hung loosely open, that same petulant voice oozed out. Where's my shawl? The arms, thinned down to their joints, dragged the torso closer. The fingers, grotesquely long, scraped against the porcelain. No legs trailed behind it, but ragged, stringy endings, and lying exposed in the cavity of her ribcage was the pulsing heart. Alzheimer's take me now, Carrie uttered, stumbling toward the hallway. The phone slipped from her grasp. She slammed the door closed. This isn't real. It's crazy. This can't be real. The hands scratched at the door. An ugly finger slipped out and felt its way around the carpet. Not real, Carrie screamed, bashing at it with her heel. The finger snapped to the side as its bone jutted hideously outward. Where's my shawl? The voice repeated, so close now she could feel the nip of cold breath at her ankles. Screaming as she ran, Carrie careened down the hallway, grabbing her keys and racing to the car. Even as she pressed on the gas and raced down the street, she could not stop screaming. At first light, the glow of the rising sun crept sluggishly over the house. Birds had started to chirp, and the grass was heavy with morning dew. Carrie Pickett slowly pushed the door to the house open and uneasily slipped inside. She was holding a knife, the price tag still on it. The house was quiet, like nothing had happened. When she was certain the coast was clear, Carrie darted into her room, ripped the shawl from the trunk, and tossed it into the gas fireplace. It took mere seconds before Carrie was watching the flames creep over the embroidered, wailing faces. "Not my shawl! Not my beautiful shawl!" Her mother's voice was shrill, but the thing did not burn. It defied all logic, all physical rationality. Carrie watched a blend of amazement and horror as the flames seemed to waft away from its woven texture. "You are cursed," she muttered to it as she twisted the valves and waited for the flames to die. "You cursed my mother. Now you've cursed me." She left the shawl and went back upstairs where the bathroom door was still shut. Hoping she'd find the bathroom spotless like before, she hesitantly opened it. Everything was still a mess, with bits of marred cabinet and contents spread all over the place. Reminders that what she had experienced really had happened, that it was all real, that it existed. Using a broom, Carrie retrieved her phone to watch the cabinet door rip out of its socket. She heard her own yelling, but there was no woman in the frame, no voice calling out to her. What had been demanding the shawl? A ghost? A demon? She wanted to wallow, to bury herself in a new crooked reality. What if she threw it out completely? What if that only makes it worse? Then pass on the curse, a voice whispered in her thoughts. Sell it in a pawn shop. Have a rummage sale. Get rid of it. Horrible as the gesture sounded, she'd be lying to herself if she said it didn't provide a bit of comfort. It's a way out, however wicked. But could she really live with herself? After some thought, Carrie made up her mind. It was noon when she pulled up to the White House. The yard was neat and pleasantly green, with lurid flowers that bunched up at the curb. Box in hand, Carrie made her way to the door. It only took a minute for Blair Wilcox to open up, surprised at the sight of Carrie. "Oh, hey there." "Hello," Carrie smiled. "Elizabeth gave me your address. I hope you don't mind the intrusion." Not at all. How can I help you?" "Well, I'm moving, and I thought it awfully rude to fall off the map after we had just reconnected." Her gaze fell to the box. "Your apology meant the world, and I thought what better way to thank you than giving you something in return." "Oh, you didn't have to do anything like that," Blair shrugged dismissively. "Please," Carrie said, holding out the box. "I really want you to have this." Blair took the box and nodded. "Well, thank you. I appreciate the gesture." To which Carrie smiled and said sweetly, "So do I."
Where do you think life's sweetest? Jeff Castaigne stood next to overflowing shelves with a book open in his hands. Where? Deep inside a woman who's stacked like a movie star. Let's say she owns an exercise gym. Yeah, that's where it's sweetest. Jeff's roommate was bent over at the waist, towel drying freshly shampooed hair. "It says right here," Jeff said, ignoring Greg's worthless comment, pointing to a page in the book, "it is life near the bone where it is sweetest." I believe that. Near the bone? What's that supposed to mean? Unless it's the pelvic bone he's talking about. He chuckled at his own sexist wit. Henry David Thoreau said this. I don't think he was talking about a woman's anatomy. Still, I don't get it. It's all mumbo-jumbo to me. Greg slung the damp towel over the back of a slouch-backed easy chair and plopped down in it. He hiked up one foot onto the lip of the cushion and began pulling at his toenails, ripping them off in slivers one by one. Jeff moved from the bookcases and lay down on the sofa. He propped the book on his chest so as to block the view of his roommate's disgusting hygiene habits. Filthy man, he thought. I'll have to go behind him and sweep the nails from the carpet and put them in the trash. It's like picking up baby shit. Doesn't he know that? Is Thoreau your philosopher of choice this week? Greg asked. It was obvious by Greg's tone of voice he didn't care about the answer. Jeff almost failed to respond, but then decided he had taken quite enough sarcasm for one night, friend or no friend. I think that's unfair, he said. I don't go around picking philosophies the way someone collects porcelain dogs, or the way you collect those stupid arty-farty posters. Greg paused in the ripping off of a bit of ragged nail from his big toe. He frowned over at the supine Jeff. Low blow. Okay, maybe I'm just being an asshole. Sorry. Quote all the Thoreau you want. What do I care? Thanks for giving your divine permission. Jeff sulked behind Thoreau's Walden and would not say anything else. All during the following day, Jeff read and pondered Thoreau's book. No matter how ringing and clear and intriguing the pages he read, he kept coming back to that one quote, nagging at it, taking it apart and putting it together again, trying to make it solely his property. How does one get near enough to the bone so that life would be sweet? There stood the question, this towering, incomprehensible question that might drive him mad if he let it. For life at this juncture was sour and smelling of decay. A desperate air clung to him, fumed off his clothes no matter how often he changed them. It rolled off him in waves from his pores. He decided that must be the reason the job interviews went badly. They could detect his desperation, maybe smell it the way he did, that fetid stench of rotting peaches left in neglect on a drain board for a month. Not his fault he'd lost his job. Houston had been good for him when he'd first moved there from the moribund Gary, Indiana. These were boom times, and jobs were for the picking, and money flowed faster than a flooding bayou. But feast always gave way to famine, and so it was for the city that boasted itself the jewel of the Southwest. He had clung to his managerial position at the Boston Whaler dealership for as long as he could. Why blame him for a loss of sales and a slumping profit margin? But they did, and he was out, and he was not coming in until he could find a job more rewarding than shoveling burgers out of a Jack-in-the-Box, thank you, Charlie Brown. You wouldn't catch him demeaning himself for minimum wage. He still had. He glanced at his fingers, and from a balled fist flicked out one finger at a time, counting the weeks. 6 weeks before his unemployment check was cut off. He'd find something worthwhile before then, wouldn't he? The possibility that he might never find work again left a little knot of fear tingling in his belly. He began to perspire, to smell himself. Needed a shower. Needed to think. Think about getting to the bone, where life was sweet again, where it wouldn't matter fate had turned, where he might again discover his lost self-respect. Around 3 p.m, just before Greg came home from work at Bayshore Hospital, Jeff found a clue in Thoreau. It was like encountering an old, long-lost friend, for immediately he remembered part of the quote from high school literature books. Our life is frittered away by detail. Simplify. Simplify. So that's how it's done, Jeff realized. That's how you get down to the pure, gleaming skeleton of existence and find peace. So obvious. He had been trying too hard, running too fast, and complicating his world unnecessarily. Simplify. What are you doing? Isn't it apparent? I'm ridding my life of detail and clutter. Greg turned down the volume on the television where a married couple was sparring on a sitcom. He went to Jeff and stooped near him on the floor by the stereo. "What are you going to do with those albums?" "The dumpster. It's all for the trash, man." "But Jeff, you've had some of those albums since we were in college together. Why would you get rid of them now? Some you'll never find again, not in the original." Jeff paused and looked at the cover of an early Jimi Hendrix album. This one had belonged to his older sister. May she find peace in her sumptuous, overcomplicated, frivolous life. He placed it with some care on top of the other albums in a cardboard box. It wasn't worth a weary sigh, really. Just junk. Really, he wouldn't miss it. "I don't want them anymore. I've lugged stuff around for years. That's the point, Greg. I'm through with all that. I'm simplifying my life." "But..." Jeff dumped the rest of the albums into the box and smiled beatifically at his friend before going to the shelves lining the far wall. He turned his back and began pulling out volumes and stacking them in piles on the floor at his feet. "Now what are you up to?" "More clutter. Got to go." "Your library!" Greg squeaked, coming to his feet. "Don't need it. It's just littering the place up. Books are dust catchers. Everything I own does nothing for me but gather dust." "Now, Jeff, you know I don't give a good goddamn about books. I wouldn't read one if my life depended on it. But you read all the time. If you throw all these books out, what are you going to read?" Jeff just said one word. "Thoreau," and continued hauling the bound titles from the shelves to stacks on the floor. Greg grabbed up Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer and held it to his chest. "Jeff, I don't understand any of this. You love books. You're a glutton for books. How can you give them up this way? And your music. I don't know what this means." Jeff turned, all in a rush. He flourished 2 thick books by Dostoevsky in front of Greg's face. "Garbage!" Greg, startled, backed immediately out of range. "Can't you get it? Haven't you been listening to me?" Sudden rage spiraled upward like a tornado swirling between the two friends. "Thoreau says that luxuries and comforts of life are not indispensable. They're hindrances to the elevation of mankind. Can't you see that? Are you blind as well as deaf? Are you a total fucking mindless vegetable?" Greg carefully replaced the Miller book on top of one of the stacks and slunk away to the far side of the living room, where he took up a watchful pose in the easy chair. He began to chew his fingernails to still the quake inside his chest. It didn't seem to bring an instant of relief. Greg stumbled home from a double shift at the hospital, so tired even his eyeballs ached. He saw that his framed posters had disappeared from the wall behind the television set. At any other time, this would have served to make him go into a rant, but he was too tired to do more than search for Jeff and ask for an explanation. He would put in a mild protest and retrieve the posters, hang them again. At Jeff's bedroom door, he paused on the threshold. Jeff stood emptying his chest of drawers into a Glad trash bag. While his back was to the door, Greg glanced quickly around. The Navajo rug his friend had bought on a visit to Santa Fe had been rolled in a corner. The covers on the bed were missing, except for one rumpled sheet and a bare pillow. The lampshade, crumpled on the floor, looked stomped. This frightened Greg more than any of the other evidence that his friend was losing it. Greg couldn't guess the import of the shade, unless Jeff meant to live in the unprotected glare of a light bulb. This was decidedly going too far. He must intervene the way they taught at the hospital outpatient alcohol clinics. Sometimes people had to intervene and risk getting their asses kicked if they saw someone they loved descending into perilous territory. Now Jeff was methodically discarding clothes. Would he go naked? Jeff finally chose to keep 2 rather than 3 pairs of jockey shorts. All he needed was a change while one was washed and drying. He bundled up the rest of the underwear into his arms, ready to stuff it all into the rapidly filling bag. He saw Greg in the door. "Hey there, you know what? I've been thinking about you pulling those double shifts. It's crazy, man. It's unenlightened. I told you what Thoreau said about luxuries and comforts. Wanting things is a trap. Once inside the trap, you never get free. The jaws lock down tight. Here you are working 16 hours straight so you can afford that Camaro you just bought, and those nights on the town with your girl, and Jeff. Yeah? He tamped down the clothes in the Glad bag, grinning all the while. What did you do with my posters? Oh, those. I put them in your room. You really should think about doing away with that kind of stuff. It just drags you down. Drags you down. Jeff, I think it's time you saw someone. Dr. Bronsky over at Bayshore is pretty good. I'll get him to give you a professional discount, and fuck you! Vehement. Aggressive. Even Jeff's good-natured temper was rapidly vanishing. Come on, Jeff, I'm serious. This is getting way out of hand. Look at you. You're throwing away your clothes, for Christ's sakes. Not everything. I'm keeping 2 pairs of jeans and 2 shirts. That's all I need. What do I need all these clothes for? For starters, maybe you'd need them for a job? For going to interviews to get a job? Go away. Jeff turned his back, pulled out the bottom drawer of his chest, and hauled out folded summer shorts and sports shirts. I can't, Jeff. I have to try to do something. Jeff halted in his pawing through the drawer. He said quietly, "If you don't go away right now, I won't be responsible for what happens." Are you threatening me now? I hear a different drummer, Greg. If you don't hear it, fine, but don't interfere. Now go away. Jeff didn't want to go, but he didn't want to stay either. He waited only until his friend turned slowly, ominously, and he saw the look of a nervous zealot, the mad, staring look of a monk holding a flame, ready to immolate himself with the cleansing holy fire. Then he knew he must leave. There was nothing he could do. Jeff had ventured too far over the edge, and he was falling without a net. He had to call from the living room, too fearful to tell Jeff anything to his face ever again. "I'm moving out, Jeff." He waited. "Do you hear me? I'm going to pack my shit and I'm out of here. You're sick, Jeff. I'm not staying with you any longer when you won't listen to me, when you won't go for help. You're dangerous. Don't you realize that? You've been throwing away stuff for a week." "Fuck you," he heard Jeff call back furiously. "Fuck you and the Gucci, Rolex, BMW, Beverly Hills horse you rode in on. I don't need you around anyway. You're nothing but a prostitute. You sold out the day you were born." Jeff Castaigne gradually came to enjoy life again. It seemed as if he had been on a quest for the Grail and found it embedded in the pure, clean stone of Thoreau's noble philosophy. He had been walking through trash, stumbling, lost, and now he could see the path before him. He read, "Some circumstantial evidence is very strong, as when you find a trout in the milk." From this he deduced that Greg's leaving was ordained. It helped him unearth order in a disorderly universe. He had never loved him or anything, not truly. They were just friends for a while, and who turned out to be a traitor to all that was good and right and just? So what if he proved to be the asshole of the world, the turncoat, the Philistine? The apartment was shaping up, looking good. He rubbed his palms together in contentment. In the living room, he'd gotten rid of everything but one kitchen straight-backed chair, an unadorned fruit crate from the Safeway, and his precious copy of Walden. In the kitchen, he'd thrown out everything but one plate, one knife, one pan. He ate from cans mostly, so what was the point of owning dinnerware and drawers full of silverware and cabinets full of cooking utensils? He saw his landlady scuttle to the dumpster and take the electric grill and the popcorn popper. Crazy old bitch. Frivolous, frowsy pack rat. His bedroom was a spare cell now, and he loved it. It was a hell of a chore to lug the bed from the apartment down the stairs and out back to the dumpster, but, sweating and swearing, he'd managed. The floor was immensely more comfortable after a few nights. He hardly ached at all anymore when he woke. He thought the Spartan idea converged well with Thoreau's philosophy, so he incorporated it into his new life modality. He had the phone company disconnect his telephone at week's end. Greg kept calling, and the job agencies too. What a fucking nuisance. What a bore. He didn't need a job. His needs were too few to demand a real income. When the unemployment check ran out, he'd apply for welfare. If they wouldn't let him have it, he'd go on the streets. It meant nothing to him one way or the other. Thoreau said, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." Jeff embraced that to mean he must let the world flow past. In the apartment, on the street, wherever he found himself, it didn't matter. He carried solitude with him like an envelope in his pocket, and no one could divest him of it ever again. They didn't even know he had it. He patted his shirt pocket as if solitude really was a thing of dimension and weight, and it belonged to him alone. It was not until a month later that Jeff found the quote that would change his life and get him down to the nub of existence. He'd still been searching for the place next to the bone, scraping and scraping away society's frills until he could feel the knife screeching somewhere far off in the dim nether reaches of the fog that had come to surround his days. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, to one who is striking at the root. That is what he came upon in his diligent study, and when he found it, he knew then he was nearly home free through the twilight of his ignorance. He heard clarion bells ringing on the reading aloud of that sentence. He shivered with anticipation at the coming understanding that crept forth from the dark corner shadows of his barren apartment. That understanding, when it took him, would rend the foundations of his misery and bring him down to the bone, down past the slime and corruption, the gate of flesh that barred the way. "Hello, Mrs. Whipshaw." "Jeff, how nice of you to visit. Won't you come in?" The old woman who had nabbed the grill and the popcorn popper from the trash dumpster led her tenant inside the dank, bird-shit-splattered living room. A white cockatiel flew through the air in protest, wings flapping wildly. "Pay no attention to Potto. He's a spoiled brat and isn't used to polite company. Hush, Potto. Behave now." Jeff declined to sit in the newspaper-covered chintz chair Mrs. Whipshaw gestured he take. He stood with his hands behind his back, smiling the stiff smile of the Buddha, the smile of the inscrutable. His gaze flicked around the room, and soon his smile evaporated, replaced by a sneer of disgust. White smears of Potto's crap covered the drapes, dripped down the neck of a brass table lamp, lay in dried, yellow-streaked plops on top of the furniture. It looked as if an insane painter had come and, in a frenzy, swung a wet brush around and around to create a barbarous nightmare of interior decoration. "I haven't seen you out of your apartment in ever so long," Mrs. Whipshaw said, shooing the contentious bird from her shoulder. Jeff watched the cockatiel closely to see where it might light down. It hung upside down from the silent, dust-layered ceiling fan and screeched at him, one eye cocked in his direction. "I haven't been out much," Jeff said, once reassured the bird was not coming to him. He felt a nausea rising and had to swallow bitter gorge. It tasted of the kidney beans he'd consumed the night before. Sickening, eating, an odious habit, made people into worms. Scoop it in, shit it out, round and round she goes, where she stops no one knows. "What happened to your nice friend, that Greg boy? Did he really move out?" "Posters," Jeff said by way of explanation. "What's that, dear?" Jeff crossed the room, his eye trained on the bird as he came for Mrs. Whipshaw, with the one knife he'd saved for cutting through meat. Disposing of the bodies. Now, Thoreau never gave advice about that sort of thing. Damn odd. He knew about everything else. You'd think the man would have left some sort of roadmap. Jeff had to ponder the situation for 2 days before he could decide what to do. He had Mrs. Whipshaw and Potto cooling in the huge freezer she kept, strangely enough, in the spare bedroom of her ground-floor apartment. He had the occupant of the other downstairs apartment, punky-looking George with the orange and green blotch in his hair, stuffed over double at the waist in his broom closet. Cluttered, cluttered. Baseball mitts, bats, skates, pool cues, bowling balls, smelly running shoes, much too cluttered for anyone sane. He had James, the quiet law student, in the bathtub in the apartment on the second floor. He sat shriveling like an old potato with a radio in his lap. Pity it wasn't a law manual, though what good that would do him now, Jeff couldn't guess. He had the Danju sisters waiting in their beds. Nice girls, not a bother in the world, but the way they lived, unbelievable. Frozen dinner trays growing mold, magazines littering the carpet, thready dust balls and trailing spider webs and filmy bikini panties hanging everywhere. It was enough litter to turn the stomach. It took Jeff all night just to get their apartment under some kind of control. He cursed them with every name in the book, nice girls or not. Anyone living like a pig needed to be called a swine. Old Man Shore was no trouble at all. He was all bent and crippled by arthritis. He couldn't run. He couldn't even crawl, not toward the last. Cried, though. Cried like a fucking baby. And him, old as the hills, didn't make proper good sense to Jeff, but there it was. A man who chose to live with a cat that scratched out shitball litter every time it used the box had to be some kind of nut to begin with. Everyone knew you could get terminal diseases from cats. Jeff had saved Shore a prolonged and no doubt much more painful death. Now to dispose of the bodies, without Thoreau's help, without his wisdom and guidance, and to return the apartment house, the entire building, to neat, impersonal harmony. It would take boxes and boxes of Glad trash bags, dozens of cardboard boxes from the Safeway, a wheelbarrow. Yes, he would need a wheelbarrow. He hoped the dumpster wasn't full tonight. He would be taking numerous loads to it. His heart sang with freedom. He was at last seeing the very edge of the pristine bone, a flicker of purity, and it was a glorious glimpse of paradise, heaven itself. He heard the pounding of feet coming up the stairs before he ever heard knocking on the door. He was tired, sweaty, needed a shower, cold and long. He peeked through the viewer and saw the intruder into his place of calm and peace was the treasonous poster man, Greg. Figured. "Jeff?" Greg called, his face pressed against the door. "Let me in." Jeff unbolted the lock and swung wide the door, turning away and walking across the room as he did so. "Jeff?" There was a pregnant pause. Then, "What the hell? What did you do with all the furniture? Jesus!" Jeff wore only a pair of grimy shorts. His hair stuck out on end as he'd been sleeping and not washing. He was covered with dirt and smudges that looked like tar or oil. "What do you want now?" "I've been worried about you. I tried to call, but the operator told me the phone was disconnected." "So?" "Well, how are you?" "What do you care? You've vamoosed for a decadent lifestyle, didn't you? You want to be featured on The Rich and Famous one day, don't you? So why would you care?" Greg cleared his throat. He looked like a weasel caught in a hole. The criticism, however exaggerated, was a little too close to home. Did you find work?" Jeff chortled unpleasantly. "Go away, Greg. I have nothing to say to you." He left the room and disappeared into the darkened hallway. Greg followed close behind. "Jeff, wait. I really mean it. I'm still worried. How are you paying the rent? Are you eating? I could help, you know. I haven't really abandoned you." "No rent. Mrs. Whipshaw said so. Dear old lady, dear bird lady." Jeff went directly into the hall bath and stepped in the tub. He slipped out of his shorts and threw them on the floor. He turned on the shower, drew the curtain. "No rent. Rent-free," Jeff said above the roar of the water. "Ask her yourself." "Maybe I will." The shower curtain snapped open and droplets of water flew in the air, spotting Greg's face. "No, you won't. Don't you dare. You stay out of my business affairs. You're no longer in my life, remember? You wanted your fucking posters and your soft cushions and your steak and potatoes. Remember?" Jeff, can't you talk with me without fighting? Can't you see your way clear to be reasonable? Jeff shut the curtain. He sudsed down his body and scrubbed himself hard with the washcloth. Finally, he said, in as sane and sensible a tone as he could muster, "Let me through, and I'll take you on a tour of my new orderly world." Full of misgivings, Greg lowered the toilet seat and sat down to wait. This time he had to do something before he left. This time it was absolutely imperative he not leave Jeff alone with his warped delusions. He had known him too long not to try to help. Jeff finished bathing, dried, dressed himself quickly in jeans and a shirt and sneakers. "I've seen the place, Jeff. You got rid of everything. It looks like a prison." Not a prison. A sanctuary. A man has to begin at home. Then, he glanced slyly at Greg, he branches out. "I don't think you're going to find very many followers. Not many people want to join a cult that denies all possession." Greg laughed easily, but soon quieted when Jeff walked past him to the front door. "Come on, I want to show you how I've hacked at the chaos and brought it under supervision. I want to show you what can be done when you simplify your life, when all the extraneous is ruthlessly cut away down to the very roots where the trouble lies." Jeff took his friend to Mrs. Whipshaw's freezer first thing. They walked together through the scrupulously cleaned, empty apartment to the spare room. When the stunned, horrified remonstration began, it was a beast of a battle to get Greg subdued enough to shut his mouth. To shut his mouth forever. Less than a week passed after Greg's visit before Jeff wandered through the silenced apartment house in the middle of the night, saying goodbye to his perfectly balanced world. People had come to inquire. Mrs. Whipshaw's son screamed that he'd be back with the police. He would see his mother, goddammit, if he had to bring the National Guard to do it. She never would have left town without telling him, he claimed from the bottom of the apartment steps. Don't tell him she would. The boyfriend of one of the Danju sisters left without a squawk, but as he went to his car, he kept squinting suspiciously over his shoulder. 2 law students stopped by to ask why their friend had not been to classes. Sick? They hadn't heard from him. Too sick to call them? Contagious. Wasn't that funny, though? He always seemed in such good health. Yes, it was time to go, as much as he hated to. He had invested a ridiculous amount of time in creating order, in simplifying the complex. It was a shame, terribly unjust, that he must flee what was an almost perfect creation. Yet, an apartment house in the center of a seedy district inside of an abhorrently chaotic big city was no real place for him anyway. He needed his own Walden Pond. He needed to escape to the wilds, sequester himself away from the mad, chattering, bruising world. With the money Greg and the apartment dwellers had on persons or in their possession, Jeff took a bus from Houston to the dry West Texas town of Midland. Once there, he hired a taxi driver to take him into the desert. "Where?" "Where no one lives," Jeff said, waving money in the man's face. "Are you nuts? How are you going to get back? No phone there, buddy. Nothing but snakes and tumbleweeds, sand and cactus. You can't go out there." "A friend's meeting me later in his car, if it's any of your business. I'll come back with him. Now will you drive?" He drove for 2 hours, blabbering all the way, bitching about the heat, the absurdity of this, the kooks he ran into. What a job. Jeff ignored him in favor of a reading, for the 10th time, from Walden. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew where the bone glistened most cleanly. It was not in the woods where Thoreau had hidden away himself. It was not in the mountains where shady towering presences safeguarded the timorous. It was not in the lush valleys where nature rioted and the senses were overwhelmed. It was in the plain, open desert, the place man had not yet desecrated with his 2-bit palaces and his glittering signs and his bubbling, stinking tarmac laid end to end forever and amen. It was here in the steaming heart of untrodden, forgotten land that Jeff Chastain knew he would find the ultimate simplification. He wanted that more than breath itself. this buddy of yours don't show up in time, you could have a sunstroke out here without water. I tell you, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen, the cabbie complained. I don't like it, none a bit. I ain't gonna be responsible for you dying out here, you know. 105 in the shade, if there was any shade. I've been trying to talk you out of this, ain't that right? Jeff failed to answer, except to say, "Pull over here. This is where I get out." Even before the taxi made a U-turn on the infrequently traveled 2-lane highway, Jeff was already heading off across the hard-packed sands. He moved west toward the lowering sun, Thoreau's book clutched tightly in hand. Heat mirages blinked on and off in the distance, like defective pale blue neon tubes. A lone vulture rode the high currents, a dot in the scalding blue sky. Here was Seoul. Here was where eternity sat down to shake hands with creatures courageous enough to come unfettered. Jeff Castaigne looked back only once to make certain he was losing sight of the long black strip of highway, to make sure he was leaving civilization behind. He thought now it had never belonged to him. That world was under rule of someone else, someone other, alien. He lost all sense of time when day segued into night, into day, into night. He stumbled and dropped the book, picked it up, surprised to see his hands blistered black, but never mind, never mind. Finally, his tongue swelled in his mouth and hung over his cracked lips like a fat gray slug. His lungs, a fiery bellows, labored to keep him going. His eyes had swollen to slits, blocking the blood-red disk of the sun. His skin, his clothes at some past time discarded, seeped clear fluid from pustules that he split apart with pinched fingers. Each passing second, he could feel the loosening of the hold the world had on the flesh. He was a dragon whose scales fell clattering at his feet. Each faltering, dragging step he managed to take brought him ever nearer the crux of reality, ever closer to the bone. He yearned. He begged. He prayed. In the end, he raged. "Didn't I sacrifice enough?" he yelled across the endless sand. "Didn't I scrape past all the filth?" He pulled on a sack of skin until he tore off pieces and had ripped an ear from his skull. He went to his knees and screamed soundlessly. At last he could hear a velvety voice hissing across the still air as it approached. He was almost home, it said. He bowed his head in relief and wept bloody tears. "Come," it said. "Nearer," it said. "Where life is simple, life is true, where no one knows you, no one cares, and nothing can get you back again. Come now, where you belong," it said. "Ever closer. Come with me, where life is sweetest, near the bone, near the white, white bone."
Chilling tales for dark nights.